Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to day 2 of Small Charity Week. Good to see you all.
Just as Kevin's admitting, everyone, if you'd like to say who you are in the chat, that would be really lovely. I'm seeing some familiar faces from day 1 already. Hello.
Just going to change my screen because I haven't got chat activated at the moment, so I'll just have a look for that. That would be lovely to see you all chatting away. If you haven't put yourself on mute, if you could put yourself on mute just because we can hear typing in the background, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Thank you. But carry on typing by all means. Lovely to see people here. Oh, from Media Trust, hello. And of course, Wayne. I'm a huge fan of you as well, Wayne. Thank you. Lovely to see you, Drew, as well. Hope you had a nice holiday.
Thank you very much.
Just give people a few minutes to join. I did press the admit all button, so I guess everybody is automatically admitted. I can't see anybody who looks like they're struggling to get in.
I think you might need to still press the admit button if people pop up, but just keep an eye out for that.
Oh, yeah. Whoops. Hello, everyone. If you haven't already, please pop your name, where you're from in the UK, and have you got rain today? I think you probably have. We certainly have in where I am in Newcastle. Welcome, welcome. Hello, Maria. Hi, Ruth. Great to see so many people here today. Thank you for joining. I think I'll make a start, shall I? So hello, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of Small Charity Week. It's excellent to be invited to take part in this session this week. I'm absolutely thrilled. I will just change my settings so I can get the presentation up and running. Bear with. I'm just checking who's entered the room as well, make sure that everybody's getting in. Oh, you really have to multitask when you're doing this, don't you? Admit all. That's the button I need. Admit all. Welcome, everyone. If you haven't done so already, please pop your name, where you're from, in the chat. Lovely to see so many people here today. Thank you for joining. Really appreciate you being here. So my name is Kevin, and I am the founder of Charity So Straight. My pronouns are he, him, and he, him, his. And if you would like to add your pronouns to your profile, if you go to your profile picture and go to the 3 little dots, press on the 3 little dots, you should be able to change or add your pronouns, and if you follow that pathway. So please see this slide, which is the slide that the lovely people from Small Charities Week have asked us to share at the beginning. So there are lots of other sessions happening this week, and if you haven't already signed up to some of these other sessions, please have a look. And you've got until 5 p.m. the day before, I believe, each session to sign up. So there's lots of great things happening this week. Did I do that well, Wayne? Perfect. I'm a pro, what can I say? So So we're going to be talking today about how to make charity workplaces more LGBTQIA plus friendly and inclusive. My name is Kevin from Charity So Straight. I founded Charity So Straight 2.5 years ago. Not long after, say, the Black Lives Matter movement was really taking off, which is obviously a really important conversation that the charity sector needs to have with itself, and has been having since then. And however, I thought to myself, we need to be able to have more than one conversation at a time, and we're not having conversations around LGBTQIA plus people's inclusion and their experience of working in the sector or using the services in the sector. So that's a conversation we also need to be having. So that underpins a lot of our work. So at Charity So Straight, we also deliver the Queer Trustees project, and we're just about to launch a new campaign aimed at charity sector leaders called Stand With Trans, but I will come on to speak about that in a bit more detail later on. So this session is all about how to diversify your charity with a specific focus on LGBTQIA plus inclusion, because that's how we roll at Charity So Straight. There's so much to discuss when it comes to LGBTQIA plus inclusion, and we can only really scratch the surface with the amount of time that we have here today. So do reach out to me to explore this further if you need any advice around recruitment, data collection, working with the LGBTQIA plus community, or with your senior team, or diversifying your trustee board. I'm just admitting some more people. Welcome to the session. As I said, please do pop your pronouns in your Zoom bio too, if you're able, when you join, while we're waiting for a few more people to join.
Kevin, if it helps, feel free to make me a co-host, and I can do lots of admitting while you're concentrating on the main presentation.
Okay, how do I do that?
It's a very good question.
Well, it's all right, Drew. Don't worry about it. Just sit back and relax and enjoy the session. It's absolutely fine. And please ask some questions at the end. It would be good to have your questions. So I'm ably assisted by Wayne, who is from the Small Charity Week team. And wave at everybody, Wayne. Nice to see you here, and I'm really glad that you are here. Thank you. And Wayne is one of the excellent organisers who's organising the whole week of events. So I'm really grateful for your support today, Wayne. Thank you. Now, to be clear, when people have questions towards the end of this session, I may not have the answers to all of your questions, but I can speak to my experience from my perspective of working in the charity sector, largely in fundraising for the last 25 years. And as a queer man with various other protected characteristics too, who has got experience of working in charities both large and small, local, regional, national and international. So I can bring a wealth of experience in terms of being a queer man and working in various different charities for quite a considerable length of time. So let's make a start. So no matter who you are or who you love, you should be able to bring your whole self to work. I'm just conscious that I may be obscuring my screen slightly. Does everybody see the slide? Fine, perfect, that's lovely, thank you. So at Charity So Straight, our vision is for every organisation in the UK voluntary sector, sorry, distracted by admitting more people, our mission is for everybody in the UK voluntary sector to be an inclusive and safe space for LGBTQIA plus people to work, volunteer, and for every queer person who needs to use the services of any charity to be welcomed and treated equally and without exception. We also want to see barriers to career progression removed for LGBTQIA plus people in the charity workplace, and to create an environment where everyone feels able to bring their whole authentic self to the workplace, and for their employers to support them when they do, so that they are able to thrive and fulfill their true potential. The current climate for LGBTQIA plus people in the UK is an increasingly hostile one. I've just been tweeting about that today from my personal account, and it's having a real impact on very many of us across all aspects of our daily life, including health, mental health, gender affirming healthcare, education, housing, and of course in employment, which is the focus of this session today. Recent findings from Stonewall, and I'll post some links later on in the chat for everybody to reference, but recent findings from Stonewall show that 1 in 4 trans people, so 26%, say that they aren't open with anyone at work about being trans. And this number increases to about 2 in 5 non-binary people, so 37% who aren't out at work, don't feel able to be out at work. And recent data from our friends at Just Like Us shows that 1/4 of all LGBTQIA plus young people go back into the closet after starting work, which clearly shouldn't be happening in any industry, as I'm sure you'll agree, but certainly absolutely shouldn't be happening in the charity sector. So the need for Charity So Straight to exist right now and for us to be speaking out on these issues feels incredibly relevant and feels never more important, really. So that's why we're here and that's what we do. So workplace inclusion matters. So equity in the workplace is all about providing all LGBTQIA plus people and indeed all minoritized communities with the same support to thrive as anybody else. Hopefully you're all here today because you believe in the importance of taking a truly intersectional approach to diversity, where you consider and value all protected characteristics, and you believe that it makes your organization more creative, sustainable, and successful. Inclusive organizations understand the value of having a wealth of perspectives around the table. They understand that enabling a diversity of perspectives to have a voice can lead to greater creativity, more considered, inclusive, and more sustainable outcomes. Having a diverse workforce enables different, better conversations to take place, and to caveat that, only as long as people who are from those minoritized communities are enabled and given a voice. And enabling different opinions to emerge can contribute to a more innovative and compassionate workplace for everybody within it. And when we do make space for different perspectives to be heard, we can arrive at different and more robust outcomes that are more in touch with the communities that we exist to serve. Having said all of this, I'm very mindful, however, that the people who most need to hear what we're saying today are probably not in the room. So I would argue that for all of us, one of the most important things for us to consider is, how do we reach those people who aren't in the room today? How do we make them sit up and listen? How do we make them care about inclusion? I'm not sure I have the answer to that, but we are trying, and we're trying to cut through. Workplace equity is a journey. This isn't some diversity or equity, however you want to phrase this. And I know people have different preferences around talking about diversity and inclusion. But workplace equity is not a destination. It's a journey that we all go on, and we keep on learning and keep on moving forwards all the time. So wherever you or your organization is right now on its equity and diversity journey, hopefully you will find something today in the session that is either thought-provoking or requires further discussion within your charity, or it's practical and you can take it away and implement it quite easily to help you move forwards along your journey towards greater equity for minoritized communities. And diversity is a journey. It's a learning journey. And I was just talking with a friend the other day about how she defines herself, and she has 2 queer teenage children and how they define themselves. And we were just saying that 10 years ago or so, we just didn't have the same language to express ourselves that we do have today. So her 2 children identify as non-binary, for example. So that term just really didn't exist in our common vocabulary 10 years ago. So our understanding of ourselves and our self-expression and the language that we use to describe ourselves has evolved so much and is constantly evolving. And I think lots of people are finding that difficult and struggling with it. So I guess our job at Charity So Straight and our job collectively as a sector is to help people understand and move forwards with their learning and their understanding of how we express ourselves now and how that continues to change. Which brings me very nicely to our next slide. Sorry, I'm just admitting people. If I look a bit distracted, I am still admitting people to the room. So that brings me very nicely onto talking about inclusive language, which I'll cover briefly. So our words are really important. They have the power to uplift, to affirm, and to celebrate people, but they also have the power to cause great harm. So LGBTQIA+ is an umbrella term, which isn't easy to say quickly. And it's an umbrella term to describe the whole of the LGBTQIA+ community. And for those of you that are not familiar with the term, and I appreciate there might be people who aren't familiar with it, so I'll just go through what that means. So it's generally understood to mean lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, and asexual plus. But even within the queer community, there are a range of different opinions about what the acronym stands for and what it means, what each letter means, and what we mean by each of those letters. So there's a range of different opinions and a range of different thoughts on that. And that's fine. There has to be room for differences of opinion. When we're not all one homogenous group, we all have different opinions. So importantly, however, it describes a massive spectrum of people with different genders, orientations, and identities. And just as we don't expect all cis-het people to be the same, let's also allow space for queer people to be as diverse and as nuanced as we allow cis-het people to be. Thank you, Wayne. You've also heard me refer to LGBTQIA+ community, and I interchange that a lot with the queer community. Usually that's done for brevity and because it's easier to say. But personally, I'm fine if other people who are maybe not within the LGBTQIA+ community use that term. I'm fine with that. I don't have an issue with it as long as it's used in a positive and descriptive way. There will be people, however, within the queer community who don't like people outside of the community using that language. So I guess it's about checking in with your audience and checking in with the people that you're speaking with and to. But as I said, people in the queer community are as rich and as varied as any other community. So it's important to note that not everyone likes using that word, queer, for example. It has been used as a slur. It has been used to oppress people, particularly gay men of a certain generation. So do check in with them first before using that particular term. I think just to be sensitive to people's experience, their lived experience, and the oppression that they may have faced. And if you use the LGBTQIA+ term and you get it wrong, that's fine. Don't worry about it too much. Acknowledge that you've got it wrong. Make sure you take steps to put things right. Ask how you can best do that. Apologize, correct yourself politely, and move on. Just make sure that you try not to repeat the same mistake again. We all make mistakes when we're talking to people, with people. I did it a couple of weeks ago. I misgendered someone accidentally, and then I corrected myself, and that's fine. People understand that these things happen, but we're trying to do better, and we're always trying to be mindful of the way that people like to be referred to and spoken about. So you heard me mention pronouns. If you were here at the beginning of the session, you heard me mention pronouns and to add your pronouns to your profile. If you're comfortable sharing your pronouns, do it all the time. That's the advice I would give. It makes it far more comfortable for other people to be themselves in the workplace. If you're a charity leader, maybe think about asking everybody to use it on their email signature. You can't mandate for it to happen. You can't ask everybody to do it and insist that they do it, because it's not mandatory. You have the right to say, no, that I'm not comfortable with that, or I'd rather be private about that. That's fine. You have to allow people to have the freedom to say, no, that's not for me. Thank you. But you can request people to do it politely and explain to them why it's important and how by using our pronouns, we encourage others to use theirs, and that enables them to feel safer about doing so within the workplace. So I do think it's a good thing to do if you feel able to do it. Many of us were taught that there are only two genders. So that really isn't the reality anymore. For very many people, they would say, I don't really fit into that gender or this gender. I kind of identify with being non-binary, and that's how I choose to prefer to see myself. So it's not the reality for very many people. So it's best to avoid language which reinforces the binary wherever possible. So avoid phrases like ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, mothers and fathers, husbands and wives, etc. It's better and more inclusive to replace this with gender neutral terms like everybody, hello people, hello folks, hello all of you, children, young people, students. Use those terms to replace binary language, which can make people feel excluded. So it's good practice not to use binary language, and it's pretty easy to practice not gendering people as well. So for example, you could try that after this conversation today. You could try it in a conversation yourself. You could say, I'll take a question from the person at the back of the room in the blue top, or I sat next to someone on the tube earlier and they were wearing an amazing jacket. So you're not necessarily using words which might gender them and make them feel excluded. So practice it. It's good to practice it and to get into the habit of using non-gendered language. You probably will find that you're using language like that all the time in everyday conversations anyway, without even thinking about it. But if you take nothing else away from today's session, I'd like you to take away these 2 words to think about and maybe read up a bit more about. So cissexism and heteronormativity. So cissexism is prejudice or discrimination against transgender people, which is wrong because not everybody is cisgender. So for example, after this session, you could maybe go away and review your internal policies through a trans inclusive lens. Or let's look also at heteronormativity, the wrong assumption that everyone is straight and heterosexual, which is simply not the case. So practice seeing everything that you write for your audiences through that lens. And these are things that we can easily do, whatever the size of our charity. This isn't something that takes a lot of budget or a lot of time necessarily to think about. But I think it's really good to build that practice in whenever you're developing new material or new policy, is think about it in a not from your own perspective maybe, but think about it from a wider perspective and who might feel alienated or who might feel an outsider to this piece of work if we're not including those voices and those perspectives. And to use a phrase from the disability rights movement, nothing about us without us, which I think is a really helpful mantra, actually. So I'm sure you've already noticed that June is Pride Month. Every year, June is generally considered to be Pride Month, which is an opportunity to celebrate and to protest all aspects of LGBTQIA+ identity. It's important to say that it just wouldn't feel right to take part in any kind of Pride activity without also taking the time to acknowledge the ongoing discrimination that the LGBTQIA+ community has felt and continues to feel. I don't know if you've all been keeping up with the news this week, but the announcement from government yesterday with regards to schools, the advice that they're giving to schools, particularly interesting for trans and non-binary children. It feels, and I've been tweeting this morning actually, it feels like a really hostile environment right now for very many of us. We're seeing queer businesses being attacked repeatedly. We're seeing physical attacks on trans people and people who are thought to be trans. It's a scary time for us, and obviously we are whole people. We exist in the workplace, but we exist out of the workplace as well. So we've got an awful lot of things going on right now for our community. So yeah, it isn't right to take part in any kind of Pride activity without acknowledging that ongoing discrimination that we face. So it's really important for charities to think carefully about how to engage with Pride in a considered, authentic and meaningful way. So pause before getting the rainbow bunting out and the flags, and ask some serious questions, which are, what do we want to achieve by taking part in Pride this year? What problems are we trying to solve? And how will taking Pride help us solve those problems? How do we ensure that we take part in Pride in a meaningful way and respectful way, which involves and centers LGBTQIA+ people within that conversation? How do we make this activity a success, both for us as a charity and for the LGBTQIA+ community? What do we add? how can we measure whether we're successful or not? What is our measure of success? How do we know? Are we setting quotas on reaching people? What is it? How do we know that how do we know that what we deliver is successful? And how, importantly, how will that inform our work as we move forward? Of course, the answer to all of these questions will be completely different for each one of you, and for every charity, wherever it is on its diversity journey, and will be different from year to year as well. But they're great questions to ask, and by answering those questions, will help you to engage with the LGBTQIA plus community and engage with Pride in a much more meaningful way. I mean, for example, I've seen a few charities, national charities saying, so larger charities, not small ones, saying that, oh, we're going to be at 7 Prides across the UK this year. Yay, come and see us. Well, that's great. That's lovely. Really nice. But nice party. But what is the meaningful action there? What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to reach new audiences? Are you trying to disseminate messaging, healthcare messaging, which is vital to certain communities? Or what are you trying to do which is meaningful, and how will you help those communities? So all of that, it really deserves greater thought before leaping in and saying, yay, here's our rainbow flag, and we're happy to celebrate with you. It needs to be a little bit more substantial than that. Having said all of that makes it sound really complicated. It actually doesn't have to be complicated. I think focus on what Pride Month is about. So it's about celebration and protest. Think about sharing content that helps your audiences to learn something about your organization, learn about the people in it and the people that you work with. Consider what information that you can share from your charity that will be really useful to the LGBTQIA plus community, that will be relevant and useful to them. And as you're probably all from smaller charities here, think about your connectedness to grassroots communities. You know, as small charities, that's absolutely one of the strengths that we have, is the connectedness to the cause and the connectedness to the communities that we serve. So I think that's a massive advantage. So perhaps think about the work that you already do with communities, and think about how you might take a similar approach to working with the LGBTQIA plus community if you're not doing already, and work towards co-curating something with the LGBTQIA community who are close or local to you, and co-curate something which is authentic, meaningful, and completely unique to your organization. And with those links that you have into community, that absolutely should be something that you can achieve. It doesn't have to be costly, and it doesn't have to be too time consuming either, but think about the links that you have into community and really explore those. And I think every charity has the potential to come up with something really interesting for Pride next year. So if it's helpful, just a flag, we've got on our Twitter account, on Charity So Straight, we have a whole thread, I think a 50 tweet thread about celebrating Pride in a meaningful way and queering your charity. And it's currently our pinned tweet on Twitter. So do have a look if you're following us on Twitter. And if you're not, I'll pop the link in the chat in a moment. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, which is all around allyship. Just going to take a sip of water. So we all have busy working schedules, right? And it can often feel challenging to navigate allyship and give the LGBTQIA plus community the support that it needs. What we don't tend to focus on is how we can effectively show up as an ally by building this support into our everyday lives, starting with the workplace. So we've already discussed aspects of practicing inclusive language and how we might do that. So let's look at what else we can do to be a better ally to our colleagues in the workplace. So firstly, make the time to find out more about the experiences of the queer community and the issues affecting them right now. So whether that's the dramatic rise in hate crime that we're seeing, whether that's the normalization of transphobia within the media or within television, whether that's the government's failure to ban conversion therapy for all LGBTQIA plus people, despite saying several years ago that that's something that would happen. The queer community is currently going through a lot, as I mentioned earlier, and particularly trans and non-binary young people and adults. So being aware of these issues will help you to be a better ally to your queer colleagues and friends. And if you're not following us, do follow us on Twitter, because we're following some amazing people who talk about these kinds of issues on a daily basis. And it's a real opportunity to find out more and learn more about the community and the struggles that we're facing. Then if you feel able, once you've done some learning yourself, you can share this information with your colleagues to help foster a more diverse, learning and caring workplace culture within your charity. Another important point on being a good ally is about being intentional and stepping up to do the work, because very often minoritized communities find themselves having to do all of the hard, heavy lifting when it comes to protecting our own rights and our own freedoms. So not always expecting people from minoritized communities to do all of the heavy lifting and fighting for their rights is a really, really great allyship activity that you can take part in. So we're struggling with enough, right? We're struggling with enough already. And so great allies help lighten the load for us. And an easy way to discuss that is to say to your colleagues from minoritized communities, what can we do that would be helpful right now? What actions can I take that would make you feel more supported? If you feel able to have those conversations, I would suggest having them. It's an incredibly supportive thing for an ally to do. Having open and authentic conversations about what meaningfully can I do that will make things better for you. Also find out about reporting processes in your workplace. Be proactive in learning about any reporting processes that can help you to be a better ally rather than a passive bystander. So many queer people may not feel comfortable reporting something themselves. They think they might out themselves as a result of doing so, or expose themselves in some way that risks their job security. And that's particularly important for younger queer people as well in the workplace who are just finding their feet. How can you be a great ally to them? And one of the ways is by calling out things that you are not happy to hear or witness whenever you see them, and report them using the proper channels if you feel comfortable doing so. So it's really important for allies to speak up when they witness inappropriate or discriminatory behavior or language in the workplace. Another point is around being sensitive to people's difference and not asking intrusive questions about people's lives or their bodies or their sexuality. It's never polite to ask very personal or very probing questions about colleagues' lives. But LGBTQIA plus people often get asked very personal questions about topics from our sex lives to our bodies. It's okay to be curious and want to learn more, and we want you to be actively learning more, but it's always better to wait for that information to be disclosed by a colleague themselves. And I think another really important point is around stepping back and ensuring that you're enabling LGBTQIA plus people's voices to be heard, and other minority communities and their voices to be heard. It's important to recognize your own privilege where you have privilege or power, and to step back when needed. It's so important for allies to use their voice to stand in solidarity with more marginalized communities, but it's equally as important to know when not to take up space, when to make space for other perspectives to be heard. And I truly believe that workplaces are the most successful at equity and inclusion when this culture is set by and trickles down from the top of the organization. So I would absolutely encourage all sector leaders to be vocal champions for inclusion. This helps your LGBTQIA plus employees feel as if their entire organization supports them to truly be themselves at work. And I've experienced this so many times from the other side, where you really feel and understand that the culture of the organization is not a comfortable place for you, and doesn't want to have discussions around diversity, which includes people like me or other queer people. The charity sector can often feel like a very tricky place to be. And I think one of the biggest barriers that we have is that we think, okay, we're the charity sector, we're nice, we're friendly and fuzzy and warm, and there are lots of queer people working in it, so it must be all right, mustn't it? No, actually, I think by making that assumption, that's one of the biggest problems that we have as a sector. We are not having conversations generally around LGBTQIA plus inclusion, and right now, particularly around trans inclusion and what that means for each charity. So these are conversations that we need to be having, grown-up conversations about the diversity within our teams. So if you're a charity leader, do consider what actions you could easily take after this session today to help ensure your workplace is a safer place for all of your LGBTQIA plus employees. That could be making a commitment for all staff training on allyship, or it could be as simple as asking people to include their pronouns in their email signature, which I mentioned earlier, or reviewing your recruitment policy and eliminating binary language. Whatever size charity you're from, no matter how small, there are always things that you can be doing to make sure that your workplace is more inclusive and LGBTQIA plus friendly. And it doesn't have to be costly or particularly time consuming, but leading from the front is important, and you set the culture for everybody else in your organization to follow. But to be clear, creating a more inclusive environment for work is everybody's responsibility, not just the responsibility of our charity leaders. It's not just something that senior managers or team leaders ought to be concerned about. We all have a part to play in making our charity workplaces a welcoming and supportive place for people from minoritized communities to be in. I'm just gonna, I'll just give you a sneak peek of the next slide. I just want to develop the theme of allyship a little bit further and say something here about organizational allyship. And this is really topical and particularly aimed at the charity leaders within the room and more senior managers in the room today. So if it's a question around inclusion and how we include minority communities in our public facing messaging, and particularly relevant at the moment because we've seen some startling examples over the past few weeks. So if you demonstrate support for minoritized communities in your public campaigning or in your Pride messaging this year, particularly around trans and non-binary communities, what will you do if you are faced with attacks from gender critical people? How will you deal with it? Will you stand firm, or will you take down your video, take down your campaign, which you've worked really hard on? Will you retract, and will you give in to the hate that you're experiencing? I think it's incredibly important that when charities or any organizations for that matter, when they say they stand with trans and queer people, that they mean it and they stand by it. Support for trans and non-binary people from the charity sector is so important right now at a time when gender critical groups are increasing their attacks on trans and non-binary people. These gender conservatives are trying to roll back LGBTQIA plus people's rights and our inclusion in society. And that includes aggressively attacking charities that demonstrate their allyship to the trans and non-binary community. And we've seen it very recently, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. These gender critical people are attempting to erase public expressions of support for our community. And in my view, we must not let them stop us from expressing our deeply held beliefs and our values. We simply can't allow this to happen in our sector. So that's one of the things that you will see me talking about quite a lot over the next few weeks on the Charity So Straight Twitter account. I believe that we must always stand up to hate and not tolerate the bullying from the gender critical movement. And what will we become as a sector? Who will we be as people if we don't stand up to it? And so I think there's a risk in speaking out on trans rights and non-binary people's inclusion. I think, yes, there is a risk of speaking out, and you might get some maybe 24 hours or 48 hours of kickback. Well, what is the greater risk, I would suggest, of not speaking out when it comes to trans rights? Who do we want to be as a sector? Who will we for Are we for everybody, or are we for some people? So recently we've seen a number of high-profile charities speak out in support of trans rights and then feel the need to backtrack as a result of the attacks from gender-critical groups. You'll have all seen Oxfam over the past 2 weeks, but they're not the first and they're not the last to be attacked in this way and struggle with attacks from the gender-critical movement. So how do we prepare for this as charities? And what are the lessons for small charities too? Can you prepare for this? And do these attacks on high-profile charities help to discourage the rest of us from speaking out? What is the impact that of what we see happening to larger charities struggling with this? What is the impact on smaller charities? Or because we're really connected to other communities that we serve, are we better equipped to deal with this and maybe have thought it through? Or because we've got that connectedness and we're more hands-on with the communities that we serve, maybe we are more, our values are clearer and we're better able to deal with this. I'm not sure, and it's a really interesting conversation, so I'm interested to continue this with people if they're interested in doing so afterwards. There's lots to think about, but I do say that I don't think that as a sector it's great for us to allow gender conservatives to win this conversation. I don't think it's right for them to be able to force us to not express our values and our beliefs as a sector. So it's really important that any work on trans inclusion needs to flow from deeply held values and have buy-in and be led by our senior leaders and our trustees. And if your charity is going to launch a trans inclusion campaign or any public facing collateral that features trans and non-binary people, it's really important that you're working closely with trans and non-binary communities on these campaigns. And I think by working in this way, we best avoid making mistakes, mistakes which only lead to greater harm for everybody involved, not least the communities that you intended to support with the work in the first place. So really problematic, but absolutely need to work with those communities on any of those campaigns. So it's really important to consider the pushback that you might receive right from the outset, and for charity leaders to consider the support that their teams, their LGBTQIA+ colleagues and their social media teams might need in order to be as well prepared as you can be to cope with this kind of attack. So this all needs to be well thought through, needs to be managed with care and consideration from the outset, and to involve as many people as possible from the outset too. So in the future at Charity So Straight, we probably will be developing some training around how to deal with this kind of hate online. But for now, there are some really great examples to look to. So I would suggest looking at the RNLI and how their social media team copes with the anti-asylum seeker, anti-immigrant rhetoric that they get bombarded with on a daily basis, and how they deal with that. But also there are a couple of resources that I can share with you as well, which I found online, which are around dealing with online hate, and that's from the Media Trust and also from Charities Against Hate. So I can post those links in the chat for you in just a moment. Which brings me on to the last slide, which I gave you a sneak preview of a few minutes ago, which is Stand With Trans, which is the campaign that we're just about to start launching at Charity So Straight. So the Stand With Trans campaign is intended to be a positive response to the growing anti-trans rhetoric that we're seeing in the UK right now, which has grown significantly over the past couple of years and is kind of growing on a week by week, day by day, and even hour by hour basis right now, and having a serious impact on the physical and mental well-being of trans and non-binary people, including many of those working or volunteering within our sector and within our small charities. The campaign, Charity So Straight campaign, sorry, the Stand With Trans campaign is also intended to kickstart an important conversation that the sector is just not having, as I referred to earlier, a conversation around trans and non-binary inclusion. But it's a conversation that we absolutely need to be having. And many charities are in a really great place and are quite an advanced stage with discussions around trans inclusion. I was speaking with somebody from Refuge the other day, and they are miles ahead of other charities with regards to, obviously it's a large charity, not a small one, but there are lots of lessons that I think we can learn from some of the larger charities, and it would be great to see them sharing some of that knowledge and learning with smaller charities too. So facilitating a way of making that work would be something that I'm certainly interested in exploring further. So the growing anti-trans narrative that we see now has been enabled by a complete absence of political leadership on this issue. Maybe there's a bit more leadership in Wales and there's a bit more leadership in Scotland, but certainly not in England at the moment on trans and non-binary inclusion. This has created a void that is being filled with gender critical voices, socially conservative views, and these are being amplified by a largely right-wing media within the UK. This has resulted in an increasingly hostile environment for trans and non-binary people to be here in the UK, and we can look to other parts of the world as well, where we're seeing that mirrored, and maybe it's a little bit more advanced in some places, some other places in the world, but it's certainly growing rapidly in the UK. So at Charity So Straight, we feel that there is a significant opportunity for third sector leaders to fill the void that we're seeing in leadership, and for them to become a force for good. And whilst we can't manage the macro picture, we can manage the charities that we lead, and we can make them safe places for trans and non-binary people to be. This is about asking, do we get into working in the charity sector because we want to create a fairer and more equitable society for everybody in it? And that means everybody in it, not just some people within it, for absolutely everybody. That's why we're here, right? We want to make the world a better place. So the first step of the Stand With Trans campaign is about signing our pledge, which will be live in a couple of weeks' time. This is a message from charity sector leaders to other charity sector leaders saying, let's draw a line in the sand here with this issue. Enough is enough. Trans and non-binary people, their lives matter, and that the charity sector is and must remain a safe place for all trans and non-binary people to be, whether they're working, volunteering, or using the services of our charities. So if you'd like to know more about the campaign, either follow us on Twitter, on our Twitter account, or you can reach out to me directly on charitysostraight@gmail.com, and I'll pop that in the chat as well for you as when we're going through the questions.
Just to say, Kevin, we're really running over. So is it time to wrap up now? Or
it is. That was the last slide, and I'm just about to finish talking. There you go. Last slide. Boom. So yeah, thanks so much for your support, everybody. Really great to have everybody here listening today. I hope you've enjoyed a lot of what has been said, and I hope it's provoked some questions for you. And if you there's the email address, so you can reach me there, or follow us at Charity So Straight or at Queer Trustees. And if you identify as LGBTQIA+ and work or volunteer in the sector, you can join our safe, trans inclusive Slack community. So I can post all these links out, or you can read them again in the video, because I think the video is going to be available to watch afterwards as well, isn't it, Wayne? Yay, thank you. And now, does anybody have any questions? I'm going to go into the chat, and Wayne, if you could help me out with that as well, that would be absolutely amazing. Drew, if you can...
Yeah, just because we were due to finish at 1:45, if people do need to go, that's fine, but we can hang on for an extra 10 minutes if you've got time as well. So yeah, if there are any questions, either stick your hand up now or stick them in the chat. Maybe if you stop sharing your screen now, Kevin.
I'll do that. That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? And I'm going to pop some links in the chat for everybody as well. The links that I referred to in the session.
Great stuff. So there's nothing in the chat. Has anyone got their hand up? I think you've stunned everyone into silence with your...
Stunned everybody into silence. Did you have any questions, Wayne or Drew?
I suppose the question for me that I hear a lot is, you know, people are inherently on the whole good, but they're also nervous of getting things wrong. And you sort of touched on that a bit, but some sort of words of encouragement of people who are finding their way and are just worried that they're not interacting because they feel that they're going to get things wrong.
I think that's a really valid point, and I think, you know, I was in Charity Hour last week, hosting Charity Hour with Tahira, and I don't know if you saw any of that, but it was really, really quiet. And somebody actually commented on how quiet it was, unusually quiet. We were talking about trans inclusion, trans and non-binary inclusion specifically. And it was a really quiet session. There was maybe about 10 or 15 people there engaging in the session. And somebody said, notably quiet this week. And I said, yeah, it's really interesting to explore what the motivations for that might be. And I think in what you say, Wayne, I think you are correct. I think there's a nervousness about speaking out and getting it wrong, but there's certainly a nervousness around trans and non-binary people and their rights right now, and not wanting to take a position. But as I said in the presentation, I think that the risk of not speaking out on trans and non-binary rights is that we end up demonizing, we end up with the persecuted community being even more persecuted and harmed by our silence as a sector. So I just think, yes, there's a risk in speaking out. There's a risk in getting things wrong. But what is the greater risk here? What is the bigger societal picture? What, you know, do we want to be a society where we see, which is a completely unsafe place for trans and non-binary people to be? We're already hearing people saying that they're thinking of leaving the country. That's real. I had a conversation with a trans woman last week who was telling me she is in a financial position to be able to do that, and she's seriously considering doing it. You know, that's not something that we want to see happening in our country, surely. So that would be my response. But I do understand, I think, people's nervousness. It's a tricky thing. And I think one of the things that we've been hearing time and again with some of the charity leaders that I've been speaking with in the planning for the Stand With Trans campaign is, I really don't feel like I know enough about this to speak out about it. I really don't. And I'm not sure it's my place to do so. And so with the Stand With Trans campaign, one of the things that we're going to do is to make sure that people, that we try, you know, interest depending and capacity depending and funding depending, we'll deliver some sessions which aim to increase our charity leaders' knowledge and understanding of trans people's experience in the UK right now, because I think that's a barrier that we need to try and overcome. And I think we're really well placed to do that in terms of the excellent conversations that we've been having with charity CEOs over the last few months with regards to the preparation for this campaign.
I think that's brilliant. Excellently answered, Kevin. Would anyone like the final question? Drew, did you have your hand up a minute ago?
No, honestly, I feel like the topic's been really good and covered lots of points, and lots of the things that I wanted to kind of have highlighted have been. So yeah, I am actually struggling to think of a question. It's been a really useful discussion, I think.
Thank you. And there's a lot more to talk about, really, that, you know, we are just covering some aspects of what we can do. There's a whole bunch of stuff around recruitment. There's a whole bunch of stuff around data collection, and obviously something that larger charities have more capacity to do. But how do we do it as small charities? And how do we do it sensitively, which doesn't expose anyone or makes them feel, we want them to feel comfortable taking part in diversity monitoring, and I would suggest we do that at the point of entry when people join the business. In terms of recruitment, there's a whole range of things that we can talk about, and queer trustees as well, diversifying our leadership teams and diversifying our governance, and the difference that can make to our charities. So yeah, loads of things to talk about, but it's been great to have the opportunity to speak today, and I'm really glad to be asked. So thank you, Wayne, and to Nicola and to Vic and the rest of the team for putting on such an amazing week of really interesting and thought-provoking events and speakers. Thank you.
Oh, Kevin, I didn't think I could be more of a fan, but thank you so much. And thank you everyone for coming along. I hope you got something really brilliant from that. And the recording will be dropping within 48 hours. So yeah, big love to Kevin as usual. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much. Goodbye.
Thanks, Kevin.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.